We got a bunch of awesome folks here to learn how to win more deals faster and build great relationships with customers through mutual action plans, or the 100 other different ways of, calling it joint execution plans, mutual success plans, whatever you want to call it, just better ways of building close partnerships and winning deals. So we have myself and Eric and Sean that are going to be running the session, but the goal is to make this interactive. That's why we have everyone on Zoom instead of the classic webinar format where it's us up on stage. We want to make sure that it's dynamic and we're learning a bit from everyone here. So maybe just to kick things off, you're in the right place if you're looking for Map University workshop, the first of 3 that we're going to be running. And maybe before we dive in, I'll quickly introduce myself and let Eric and Sean do the same. And then we can talk through the agenda and dig right in. So I'm Ross, CEO and co-founder of Accord. Previous to founding Accord about 3 years ago, I was at Stripe as one of the first business and sales hires back in 2015, when they had the crazy idea of actually talking to customers instead of just their public API documentation, and was the top rep there for nearly 16 quarters, and fell in love with this as we went up market, fell in love with this idea behind sales, which is using mutual action plans, aligning with customers on, instead of having your close plan and they have their procurement plan, why don't we get on the same page about expectations, business cases, stakeholders involved, resources, and do this thing together and build a company around it. So all that next, Sean, if you want to introduce yourself and then pass it off to Eric.
Sure thing. Hey, everyone. I'm Sean Cardenas. I'm sales manager over here at Atrium. I've been at the company for almost 4 years now. I was one of the first sellers over here, and we went to go market in 2019. So building up the sales motion, what it actually sounds like to pitch the thing and all of that. It's been super fun. And prior to that, I was a sales manager over at Yelp.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Eric Smith. I've got probably like the most basic name here. I get it, Eric Smith, probably like a million of us. But I've been, doing B2B sales for like 15 years now, working for various software companies, and really excited to chat with all of you.
Awesome. Well, if folks don't mind, maybe adding, you can edit your name here, maybe adding your company or role might be helpful, just to make sure we can kind of focus on the right stuff. I'll just do the same for myself here, Accord.
You can also add it in the chat and drop any questions you have in the session.
So that's an even better way, since we can't see everyone. So Ross, Accord. Yeah, and feel free during the session to drop a question there or interrupt us, because want to make sure, again, it's more of an engaging session with all of us here on Zoom. What up, Waylon? Good to see you. Good to see everyone here. Awesome. And I'm like half want to do, we have these slides here, but I also want to make sure that it's not like me just up here talking the whole time. So maybe we'll do a mix of this. So we just went through intros if you're just jumping on. And today we're going to be talking about 2 main things. First, the why behind mutual action plans, for different level of sales organizations, from frontline sellers, how to use this to win more deals, to managers, how to make sure you can coach reps to do the right stuff, to leadership to make sure you have a repeatable, consistent sales motion that your team's following. And then we'll start diving into the how, getting really tactical, looking at actual mutual action plans and talking about the different aspects of it and how to make sure you can win the most deals and drive deals forward through using them. And then if you are interested in the future ones, we're going to host a couple more with other experts and how to build the best one. I think a lot of people have played around with different versions of mutual action plans, and we'll be talking about how to take them from maybe a 9 to a 10. And then lastly, we'll talk about like specific talk tracks and actually how to use it in practice with your buyers successfully. So to start, maybe I'll pass it over back to Eric. Why should folks care about using mutual action plans? And maybe we'll kind of shed a bit of light on like why now, with budgets getting a bit tighter, more stakeholders involved in every deal. Why should folks care about using mutual action plans?
Well, I remember first when I started thinking about the concept, and it was 2016. I was working for a tech company, and I literally just got sick of losing. I'm like, I'm losing too much. I'm getting blown off too much. I've got to do something different, whatever it is. And so I got sick of sending like a follow-up email with like 3 paragraphs and like, hey, here's all of our action items. Here's 4 attachments that you requested. And then that just getting lost. And then it's just, we never follow up on it. So I started doing things manual. I'd create like a mutual action plan and I'd send it and try to keep things as simple as possible. And my whole thing is I just want to keep myself accountable and I want to keep my buyers accountable. And that's all I wanted to do at the time. And now it's evolved into a lot more of a robust process, but that's all I wanted to do at the time, was just keep everybody accountable, keep the process simple for everybody, and like provide the best buyer's experience possible.
Awesome. Well put, Eric. And Sean, how about yourself? Why did you start to use them, and why do you have all your reps on any qualified deal and use mutual plans?
So it was December of 2021, and I was working this larger account. Didn't go into like all of our products, but Atrium runs for larger accounts, kind of a pilot. And I was about 150 emails in across 12 different contacts. And I couldn't get this one SVP to be accountable, to show up to meetings, and no one really knew everything that was going on. Of course, I CC'd people on emails, but show of hands, whose inbox is down to 0 at this given point in time? And I had so much frustration for it because I was trying to get this deal done. It was slipping. And I was like, there has to be like something different. So for me, that was the last deal that I ever ran where I didn't have an accord to have like next steps actually drawn out. I really wish I had a cord back then, actually, because I might not have slipped it, and my CRO at the time might not have been upset with me that it slipped. But yeah, that's the why, because like inboxes are a mess, and holding people accountable and timelines and things just like are so difficult over email.
So for me, it was like way back, I had the idea of like, hey, I want to do this. It was manual. And then when I was working at Zerigo, similar, I had this deal, and we've got all these steps that we just discussed. I'm like, there has to be a tool out there. So I started researching, and I found a couple of them, and I found a cord, did a trial, got everything mapped out. And I don't know, you might remember at the time, Cord, I'm asking all these questions because I wanted to make sure it was perfect, send it off to my buyer. It was just an awesome experience. So we've replicated it across our entire sales org too. And just based on that one first experience, which is sometimes how it starts.
Totally. So I guess of a show of hands here, maybe add to the chat here of this group of folks, how many people here use like a Google Docs or Sheets or PowerPoint, or maybe it's just kind of a long format email to kind of build this mutual plan with a customer?
Used to use slides.
Yeah, I used to use basically hack together sheets for like the next steps portion of it and milestones. And then I would have a separate doc for the business case, where I'd have like the 1-pager business case of kind of the why and the value and the ROI. Then I'd have the sheet with all the key milestones and everything. Then I would use our content management system for all the resources separate to that. And honestly, from like a rep by rep level, like it does the job. I think it's really hard to get your team to sell in the same kind of way if everyone's doing a different thing. So we had some people that like to use Asana for it, some people that like to use PowerPoint for it, Sheets, Docs, etc. It's really hard to build these best practices and to get better at selling as an organization if everyone's kind of hacking together. But to go back really quick to the deck in terms of the why here, like, yes, to win more deals faster and, all the great stuff that Eric just shared and Sean in terms of actually closing the deal. I think really specifically, when you break down what's involved in a sale, I would say there's kind of 5 key reasons to use something like this beyond, again, just winning more. Is in the beginning, qualifying. Someone's not going to make a considered purchase of something that costs more than, 5 or 10K if they're not leaning into, hey, I'm sharing the way to buy this thing. If they're not engaging in any way, they're likely not going to buy. And wouldn't you rather know that very early on in the deal than later? And I used to use these things like very much late stage in the deal when we're doing a lot of the validation versus upfront and the qualification. So kind of move to using this early on. Hey, if they're not going to engage in any way, probably aren't going to spend the time looping in other stakeholders and spending that social capital if they won't even look at what it takes to evaluate the solution that I'm selling. So firstly, for qualifying. Next, for setting expectations. And I think the best sellers, probably the folks here learning how to get better, are really good expectation setters with the buyer. And it's not just about, hey, this is what we're doing now, and this is what we're going to do next. It's, hey, this is what we're doing today. This is what would make sense next to get to this final outcome. And it's not closing the deal. It's to success for them. They're trying to solve this business problem. For us, it might be, hey, we're going to do this meeting here to see if it makes sense to explore a chord. And then maybe we'll set up a demo with the right people on your team. But that's in order to get to you increasing your win rates in deal velocity by at least 20%. Does that sound good? And making sure you're setting all those milestones up front. Obviously, facilitating multi-threading, more important than ever. You have the finance buyer and you have that C-level or SVP level stakeholder in any considered purchase today, making sure you're getting them involved early. Establish that clear timeline, which really has to do with expectation setting. And then lastly, maybe for more so the management level people here, really, you're taking a stab in the dark. If you don't have a plan that's aligned with the buyer, it's really your rep's best guess. And, even the best sellers aren't going to have that intuition. Making sure you're aligning the timeline with the actual buyer's journey are some of the key reasons there. Any questions before we move on? Maybe some people that have had learnings from testing this out, or I'll pause and
I'll add something
Yeah.
for you there. One of the things, like the setting expectations part, like I think that was great about like setting next steps and all of that matter. But one is also just like losing sight of what's the business objective that somebody is trying to solve for. I don't know like how complex everyone's like products are on this call, but like at some points, like our product Atrium, somebody can get, I call it lost in the sauce of like, why are we looking at this thing? Is it the pretty charts? Is it because a sales rep is fun, takes me out for golf and for drinks and all of that? Like, what's the actual business objective? And so like with emails, it's very easy to get lost all the time of here's our North Star, here's what we're going towards. And so having something that's a mutual action plan of like, here's our next steps, here's the things you do. Oh, and also just as a reminder, here's the thing that we're actually solving for. Are we still doing those things? And so that's where like we, at least in my company, have gotten huge value out of something like actually implementing this thing, because it's like front and center. You can never forget this is what we're striving towards right now for you guys to make your sales work better.
Well, and then Sean, just to add on that, so you may build something really nice out with your champion and build out the business objectives, and then they can then take what you've built and pass it along like to others on the team.
Yes.
They're now empowered to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And you may have like an economic buyer in the background who could stall the deal at the last second. They say, oh, wow, you guys have already done all this work. Let's not kill this deal. Let's push it through. And then, as we all know, time kills all deals, and we can progress things faster and more efficiently. So, yeah.
Totally. Well, before we move forward, I know a few people jumped in here. Don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but we're all probably sellers in here. So maybe is it Mary or Mari and Dean or Julian, if you want to add some color on, kind of what you've learned. And I think Brad as well jumped in with some thoughts about how your team's been using this. And if you want to share kind of, your experience so far with testing out mutual plans.
Yeah, we are actually in the process of implementing maps. It's an established sales OKR for all new deals going forward to have a map. But I put it in the chat, it is a janky Google sheet so far. It does the job, but it's all about honing it, identifying the specific processes to your organization, the product and the persona. Those are the tricky parts. So it's like looping in product and customer success to make sure like the map that we're creating is applicable across the entire organization. And like, that's the challenge we're at right now.
Internally or externally? Because I see a lot of people try to, they're doing this thing for the customer, and then they end up having all these internal stakeholders, and it becomes this like huge thing that might be overwhelming to the buyer that's never, bought the thing before. So curious to get your take on that.
So right now we've kept it simple. Well, we definitely use the KISS method for a lot of things when building it. It's strictly the buying process and the value add throughout, and that's where we're keeping it. It's the additional folks internally on our side that are like, hey, how do we add new business cases that are solidified by the product team or the solutions team? So it's like added complexity on top of that.
Nice. Yeah, that's one of the, I think, sounds like you've avoided, but one of the early mistakes I think people make when they look to build out this to start is like, it's everything involved in the buying process versus like the key value driving milestones for the buyer to really simplify the process. Yeah. Any other thoughts from folks that?
We're really early. We just have a need. everybody's doing different things all across the board, and there's not a lot of efficiency, so there's not a lot of visibility. So I'm just trying to build something out to implement first with my team, and then push to other sales teams as well.
Awesome. And is that living in Sheets as well, or did you find another kind of project management platform to build it on?
I'm building it in Excel right now,
Okay.
and really just kind of testing it out with some of my reps. But that's it. Yeah, low tech.
We got to start somewhere. Better than 90% of teams out there that don't even have something written down to help the buyer understand where they're at. So it's a good start. Any other thoughts, Julian? I know you jumped in there as well. If you want to share where you're at in the journey.
Yeah, for sure. I actually came across mutual action plans. I think it was you on 30 MPC with Nick and Armand. I'm not sure if it was,
yeah, those guys, yeah.
But essentially, like, I learned what mutual action plans were. So I kind of like did my own research, found like templates online, used like the Google Sheet method. That wasn't really effective. So essentially, like the way that I'm doing it, especially just for my team, because we're considered SMB, it's not really standardized. I kind of have like my own janky little like slide. And then just in case like they want to get a little bit more in detail, I built out like a Google Doc that has like some of the milestones, some of the different key stakeholders, things like that. But it did feel like very messy, and it did feel like you kind of need like one place to centralize everything. So your internal stakeholders can get a sense of where you're at with the deal, and then along with like their stakeholders on the other side.
Totally. Yeah. The kind of going back to the simplicity, making something that like, is probably going to be complicated again, if it's a considered purchase where there needs to be a salesperson on the other side, like it's innately complex, or else it'd be PLG and self-serve. How do you make it seem digestible? And then, as you progress, probably layering on that complexity to it, right? When you're actually getting into maybe testing it out, the validation, maybe the technical side of things, but especially in the start, you want it to feel like, I'm going to walk you through this. It's going to be really simple. I'm going to hold your hand through the process, and kind of like Mary mentioned, like making sure that it feels repeatable for your whole team, and not that every single person needs to recreate the wheel on every single opportunity. Awesome. Some great thoughts. Appreciate everyone chiming in there and making it less of a monologue for me, so Gong doesn't give me a terrible score on this call. So next would be how to create, and this is actually probably really topical for some folks today that are trying to build it out and maybe iterate on a V1 or V2 of their mutual plans. I would say that these are probably the top 5 key pieces to consolidating every place where a buyer needs to engage to understand how to get the deal done. First and foremost, and I know Sean, you guys are really good at this, and Eric, you've also mentioned kind of what we call the why behind the deal being the key driver. Yes, mutual plans are about milestones and next steps, but really what they're about is the why behind the deal and getting the stuff done because of that. So Sean, if you want to share kind of your journey from what you were doing before and what you're doing now, I think you guys are kind of the gold standard for building some great business cases to get deals done.
Yeah. What we used to do back in the day was put together like these Google slides. We called them Hot Pockets. And it was so janky. We looked startup just by sharing it all the time. And that was one of the things I was like, God, we got to be like a big person company at some point here. And what we would do is tons of screenshots. We'd have a bunch of testimonials. We'd have pricing options. We'd have feedback quotes from people like in pilots. And like, it took a lot of time just for like the people on my team because I'm just a monster and I'll, work until like 2 a.m. on these things. Well, that's not sustainable, and I can't expect anybody else in the team to actually do that. So like the time putting into it was just ridiculous. And so what we had to kind of focus on is what is a very clean and concise way to put together like a summary page. It's like templated almost. And that's part of what actually led me over to Accord in the first place. I was like, whoa, we will look like a big person company by just presenting, this is the key reasons why you're looking at this. And here are the things in Atrium, for example, of how we can solve to that.
You mind sharing your template? I don't know if you have a version of it before or after, just to kind of make it a bit more visual for everyone, because I'm sure everyone's doing a version of this today that's on the call.
Sure. Yeah. Let me, how do I escape full mode here? Yeah. Well, I'll let Eric kind of
Yeah.
go into it, and then while I'm pulling up the janky hot pocket.
Yeah, I mean, while you're pulling that up, you talk about like being a grown-up company. We've all been through like buying experiences where it's not great. Like if we've ever bought software or bought something, it's like, man, this isn't the best experience. So when we put something like this in front of a buyer, just their perception of us is like, wow, not only does this rep like have all of his crap together, but this company, I'm really impressed, you know, and I've got that a lot, and it really helps differentiate, you know, from the competition or all the noise out there. So that's one big thing for me is differentiation and having our crap together.
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, so I have our janky documentation here, Ross. Let me share screen. So this was the start of our template, our hot pockets back in the day. The gross yellow and bold text is all of the instructions that people have to follow as they're building it out. You have your table of contents. You have your now outdated Atrium blue. You have here all your instructions. Here are examples of how to do this. And this thing was 52 slides of screenshots and all of this. And just like, hey, when you're a startup, you got to throw things together and you got to make some efforts. And we did, and we were successful with putting things like this. But to Eric's point, this isn't exactly Scream. They got their crap together, and what we're buying from them is like top notch. This is like, did they just start the company last night? But you got to start somewhere. So this is like 52 slides of the business case of why you should go it. And the other thing that is not great about Google Slides, you have no idea if this gets viewed. I'd spend like 5 hours putting this thing together, and then no way of being able to know, like, was it shared? Did people look at it? Or was it just used on like the one Zoom call where I presented it to the CRO and then that was it? That was really like a frustration.
I was telling you earlier that I bought Atrium a couple of years ago, just kind of coincidentally, and I got one of those. I remember
you got the hot pocket from my buddy Peter. Yeah,
it was pre-Accord, so I'd love to see like how you guys have transformed.
Yeah,
that.
let's see what you're doing now. That's so funny. I didn't even know when we were all getting on and doing like a quick intros before this session.
Sure.
I was actually a power user of Atrium before.
Yes, Eric was a big time power user. I'll share this one. This is one that I actually created. It's one of like it's okay. So this is one that I had put together. So here's our summary page. At the top, we talk about data-driven priorities. Atrium's a data-driven sales management tool, helps managers figure out what the heck to coach on. And so at the top of the screen, you see these are the things that we're looking to help with: performance management and tracking ramp of reps. Below that, you actually then go into, cool, what are the things that is necessary right now in an organization? What are you talking about? Your blurb on about Atrium itself. And then you go into, here are the priorities, and then here are your clickable links into what it is that you will help with those priorities. And then you go into it further and it's like, well, what does onboarding look like after that? And then what do testimonials look like? And I just love, I can download this. I can have it be clicked on and be shared internally with the organization, because it's like, we put good work into that. We want like a business case to be like very clean and concise. So we've gotten a huge value out of just a summary page alone.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of what I was hacking together before on Docs, Google Docs. But then it's not necessarily contextualized to like the mutual plan itself in terms of like, what are we doing next and who's involved and all that good stuff. Cool. So that's the first piece, kind of going back to, I just wanted to make sure we spend time on that, because I think that's kind of what drives everything else. It's what drives the next steps. So what drives the timeline, is what drives the stakeholders and resources. Next are next steps. So making sure that you're aligning, I think Dean put it really well, is like, what are the customer facing milestones that you're focused on? It's not everything. It's not all the little things that you're doing. It's not, them sending over all the data. This is like the key things that you want to highlight to make sure that you're tracking towards a successful deal. I think a lot of times sales teams look at this as like internal milestones and have in Salesforce as like exit criteria of stages. And you really need to make sure that you're aligning that with the buying process. And it's not just the thing you're looking at internally, but the thing that you're mapping towards externally. Eric, if you want to share maybe a few thoughts, or actually maybe we'll open this up to the group. How do you track, kind of the key milestones on a customer engagement today? And what do you kind of find most helpful for something like a mutual plan? I will call on people if the awkward silence continues.
Well, what I'll say really briefly is what you guys have transformed from Atrium to that 50 slides into that Accord. Like, just think about what the buyers like. I hate being overwhelmed, and if I'm overwhelmed by anything, a lot of times I just say, just screw it. I'm not doing this. You know what? No matter what it is.
Totally.
Like, if I'm buying, no matter what I'm buying, even if it's just something small, you know, if I'm overwhelmed, I'm just going to table it because I don't have the time. But and a lot of times I'm not buying the best product per se.
Yeah.
I'm buying who's giving me the best experience and who's holding my hand through the process. And that's I
Yeah.
love what you guys have done, Sean, is you guys have turned in like this. I mean, it's nice. It's okay, you know, your 50-page slide deck, but it overwhelms me. And I bought it.
Yeah.
So this isn't the best example because I bought you guys anyway, but just how you guys have broken it down and simplified it, I think is awesome.
Well, that was because Peter is a hell of a rep, and it was probably a good experience, at least like talking with the guy, if nothing else, right?
Peter,
and
yeah.
you hit on something right there. I think of for a fellow Accord buyer, he put this on LinkedIn the other day, and I shared it with my team. Buying things is so difficult and so overwhelming, and being like an internal champion itself. So like Eric, to your point of like being overwhelmed with the process or things you have to do. And it's like, oh, I got to go to this thing. I got to just sell this thing. I have this next step, this email I have to respond to. Like, I'm sure that for us that have like bought something before, you've like starred an email that you gotten from a vendor, and then you forget to ever go back to it. Right. And it's just like, I can't right now because I'm in back-to-back with my own meetings. And so just like making the experience more clean and concise so a champion can effectively do their job is really critical, which is like, you know, huge key point for like a mutual action plan for us.
For sure. And Waylon, I just saw you jump in the chat there and mention Joel. I've heard good things. I know this recently came out. Yeah, if you want to share kind of some of the takeaways there and how this relates to mutual plans and the executive summary.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm just like doing a little under desk treadmill here while I watch. So that's why I'm off camera, trying to get those steps in. Yeah, so basically the premise of Jolt is that the standard belief that when we get a no decision that people are choosing the status quo over change is not really what's happening. It's that like, so they are bought in likely to the fact that your proposed, you know, future state is significantly better than the current state. The problem is that, you know, like I sell vendor, for example, we help people reduce their software costs. So you can think about, let's say we can save you $1 million. No one currently is directly responsible for the fact that you're not saving $1 million. Whereas if you go spend $120,000 on vendor and it doesn't work, now you're specifically responsible for making a mistake. And so what the typical playbook is when we see someone stall like that 5-yard line is to kind of say, they call it relitigating the status quo. Like, how do we go back and show them again, like how bad the current state is versus what we're trying to get them to? And this actually just like increases feelings of like fear and apprehension. And so what the correct playbook, and that, so it results in, I think 86% of cases that actually has a negative impact on their close rates. What the best sellers do is they really guide people by the hand through the process, make them feel like, one, like they eliminate unnecessary education, right? So they will actually actively discourage them from like seeking out information that's just going to complicate things. So it's like they act kind of like a tour guide. It's kind of like, you told me what your priorities for this vacation were. Now I'm going to book everything for you, and I'm going to just take you through that process. And so that like kind of, you know, dovetails pretty nicely with the mutual action plan. You're basically right from the get-go saying like, here's the process that we're going to go through together, and here's how I'm going to support you through that process. So really, really good book. And yeah, I think it nice impact. It's the best sales book I've read in a long time. To be honest, I preferred it to Challenger.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, hopefully you're getting your rev share on that, the book sales too. Where's your promo code, Waylon? No, that's really interesting and does align with the overall concept here, which is like, and a phrase that I always think about in sales today is your team, and you need to be sense-making sellers. It's not about information anymore, and this is the opposite of that. This isn't here's all the things, is here's everything you need to know. That's super pared down in terms of what's the case if anyone asks you why you're trying to champion this or why you're going to do this. This is it really simply, and I can send it to them. hey, how are we going to go through this process? I can articulate it because it's broken down into really simple steps. When are we going to do this by? Who's involved? And what do I need to share with people? Like, that's really the core concept behind all the, we can talk about qualification and all these other things. Really, it's how do you make it as simple as possible for the buyer to buy? And these are all just ways to do that. So that's a good.
I got that quoted to me from multiple people using Accord, which is why I loved you guys from the beginning, because somebody said, Sean, you're making it easy to buy from you. And I said, say less. Here's the contract.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Have you signed yet? Cool. With just about 10 minutes left, I think we've gone through, the basics, what we're going to talk about in this session. Then the next two, why use them in the first place? Again, all of our jobs here is probably to win more deals faster and onboard them successfully. Some of the details there, how to create them, making sure we talked a lot about, which I think the most important pieces here is really the why behind the deal, making sure you're setting really simple, clear next steps, timelines, stakeholders, resources. Any questions maybe before we move on about this stuff to just general Q&A?
I love actually Eric's take on this. One of the things in like building that I made the mistake of, I'd love your take, Eric, when I first started was like, I didn't work backwards from our actual sales motion when establishing like next steps in a mutual action plan. I started throwing together like, here's what I would do. Here's maybe a good idea. And my Accord, when I first like laid out all of my next steps, was just like, not great. Because it was like, well, this is a mess. This is not repeatable. And this doesn't have anything to do with our current stages. So like, Eric, I'm curious, like when you were like building and doing like your steps and stuff, your mutual action plan, like how did you go about establishing like what the right next steps were and then vetting out the ones that were like bad ideas?
Yeah, it just goes back to like, I want to try and be the consultant. I want to try and hold their hand. Like, here's how we get to the finish line. And I don't want to overwhelm them. And we'll kind of, and I will let them know, like, we'll build upon this as we progress. And before every call, I'll pull up my Accord and say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's where we're at. Here's what I've agreed to do. Here's what you have agreed to do. Let's outline those. And then, by the way, here's how we get to the finish line from there. So just keeping everybody accountable and adding in steps that are relevant at the right time. But also there is going to be a playbook and there's going to be repeatable steps, but there's also going to be one-off steps that come up that we need to throw in.
Yeah, if one of you don't mind actually showing what that looks like, maybe to kind of visualize. Eric, I think you guys have a really good playbook. If you want to steal the screen share for a second.
Yeah. Or do you want me to show the playbook, or do you want me to show just like an example?
An example one probably actually makes more sense.
Yeah. Let me show you one. So I've got it. Let's see. Let me find it here. Where did it go? Give me a second. I had it teed up and then I lost it. Okay, so this is just kind of a blinded one, but we had the initial presentation, and then here's an example of a section that I made that I would pull up at like the end of a call and say, okay, and ideally, if you have like a BDR on the call with you, or you can fill it out on the fly, like that's ideal. That's not always going to happen. So maybe you can do it on the fly at the end. But I like to have something like this at the end and say, hey, here's what we talked about. Because usually on calls, we're going to have like 5 or 7 or more action items. Hey, can you send me these attachments? So I like to pull this up and say, hey, here's what we talked about today, just to summarize our conversation. Here's what you're doing. Here's what I'm doing. No, I'm actually going to share this with you, so you will have full visibility into this. And then we're just going to build upon it as we go. So that's just kind of an example. Here's post-presentation follow-up. Some of our next steps were pricing and ROI discussions. So we kind of map out like what we've discussed. We've got some legal stuff we want to do, and then finally getting down to partnership and just laying it all out. So it's really easy for them to see what's immediate next steps and then what's like a couple weeks down the road as well. Does that help, Ross?
Yeah, this is awesome. And I think everyone kind of has their own version of this. Either it's through that, email chain with a bunch of folks, or it's Google Doc, sheet, PowerPoint, et cetera. But yeah, having something that's you can share and, look super professional with. I know you can also set the dates in terms of milestones here on the right side as well to align. So yeah, super helpful to see an example here. And I think what every sales leader wants their team to be doing, right, is set really clear, actionable next steps with their team. So Awesome. Well, with a few minutes left, I want to open it up to a Q&A. I think we get a lot of questions either from sales managers or directors being like, I've tried to roll this out. How do you successfully think about getting, teams to have this type of rigor and reps to actually follow something that, is a bit more structured to drive that repeatability and consistency on deals, or reps asking like, hey, how can I start to use something like this more effective? So feel free to either jump into the chat or unmute yourself, and we're happy to field a few questions.
How are you
I've got a
guys?
question. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Anyway. No, go for it.
Okay. I'm just thinking about in terms of like when to implement. And like, do we want to do this after we've got someone who's bought in significantly and we're like, okay, it's me and you now, how do we get this done? Or do we think about doing it even earlier and just like putting the caveat in that like, hey, this is what a process would look like. Obviously, at any point in this process, if it's not the right fit, we part ways. But this is the process we go through. Like, how do you guys think about that?
I think the former, because sometimes you'll even lose people because they're afraid of what it could be. In their mind, it's all what's the unknown is always worse than the known, right? So I always love this idea of like a no ask touch in sales. So the no ask is like, hey, we're not going to build this thing out yet, but like, hey, just so you know, this is how we're going to do the thing. This is how people buy. I've done, we've done this hundreds of times. This is generally what it looks like. And if you've done a good job of building that playbook, you don't even need to edit it to have it be something that's super digestible. It's like, hey, first people understand what we do and what they do. Then we'll go through some sort of validation process. This is what it kind of looks like. Then we'd work on a partnership thing, and this is what onboarding looks like. Cool. And they're like, oh shit, this person's going to be with me and walk me through all of this stuff. Well, maybe I will actually spend more time on this because I thought this would be a hard project to take on, but like I have a partner who's going to do this for me. And as a buyer in the last few years, starting Accord, I have reprioritized my projects based on how easy it was to get done working with this company, or deprioritized if I felt like, oh, wow, like this is gonna be a lot of work for me because this person doesn't really know what they're doing and I'm going to have to drive a lot of this project. So it's definitely more about like how you do it earlier than doing it earlier. I think, you don't want to be that overwhelming rep to be this super assumptive end of the first call, be like, okay, and this is what we're going to do next. And I want to bring your VP in here and this thing. And you're like, dude, like, slow down. You don't have the social capital yet and like buy-in to do that. And I think a lot of people worry. I see a lot of junior reps worry that they're asking their customer to do too much too early. And it's not about that. It's about educating first. Then once you get the buy-in, and that's like the art and science of something like this, right? Where you're building process, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
there's also a benefit to, there's a benefit to when people are not receptive as the potential buyer of like the Accord and like going through next steps. It's actually a great indicator of like the potential health of this deal moving forward, because like all of us probably have reps with happy ears at some given point, right? And so if somebody's like, no, that's okay, I don't want to like go through what next steps are, right? It's like, oh, temperature check, you're actually not that serious. That's been like really helpful for us as we introduce Accords to potential buyers.
Yeah. And then for me, like I want to try to avoid like a 3 or 4 paragraph email, 3 attachments. So even if it's a couple steps, like after every call, we're typically going to have a couple steps we've agreed upon. Hey, I was going to send you this case study. I've actually put it all into this Accord here, and I'm going to share it with you. So even if it's not like fully built out, like to a T yet, at least I'm sending them something and like avoiding sending a long email that they're probably not going to read.
Yeah. Well, any follow-ups on that?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Appreciate that context.
Awesome, man. And then Brad, you were going to jump in as well.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, what do you typically see bringing another tool to your team, and like, how do you guys implement Accord or your map systems with other software that you're already using, specifically like CRMs or SalesLoft or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had to figure a lot of this stuff out just by like, when the deal is like, shit, what do we do now? Kind of thing. I think what we found most effective is, you need buy-in from leadership on a prescriptive way of selling. Like, I think where this stuff works is there's some sort of initiative or drive from, either a VP of sales or CRO or senior director to be like, we really need more rigor on our deals. We are losing winnable deals. And this is the right way to approach that by having a stronger business case and a clearer path for our customers. And then counterintuitively, I think it's about starting with a couple teams versus everyone. And starting with the folks that already do this. They're the people that are probably on this call. They're the ones hacking together the sheets or docs or something else. And they're like, we know we need to be doing this, but we don't have the tools to do it. And it's a lot more work. So then starting there, getting those couple wins, having like what Sean said, like that recorded call from the customer being like, literally like, hold up, this is like the easiest purchasing process because you're literally giving me what I need to then go back to my manager who's going to be asking for this and the process. And it's really easy for me to spend my sort of capital to then ask other people to help when there's a very clear plan. So it's kind of like, first, you need to want to get better in the stuff. Like you only change when you need to change kind of thing. And then it's about starting with those couple people that really get it to drive that validation first. And then everyone's like, I want to be responded to on a call like that. I want to be the manager or director on my team who's up leveling my team by this and kind of have these outcomes. And then in terms of integrations, that was a surprise to us because we're like, hey, the way that people are doing this thing today isn't integrated. So we thought we'd build this platform as standalone, very quickly realized, huge mistake. Sales operations is never letting you into a company without it fully mapped to the CRM. So we built it into Accord as anything that happens in the platform gets mapped back to either Salesforce or HubSpot, whatever platform you're using, and then vice versa. So you can actually, now we just launched this thing called auto creation, which once you have an opportunity and say stage 2,
love this.
Yeah, when you need your team to actually introduce it, Sean doesn't need to go to his 10 reps and be like, hey, everyone, like, how are you doing with creating these mutual plans? It's like, boom, literally automatically creates it in Salesforce, pings both of them, time to align on the business case and stakeholders and timeline, everyone. And it's very clear when you're not doing that. So yeah, Sean, I don't know if you have.
I love the feature so much because it just saves time for reps. For adoption purposes, for us, we deploy an Accord at the second meeting. And it's actually a required field on the opportunity for us that like the summary page at least has to be filled out before the opportunity can advance a stage. An email alert goes out, and then I actually get an email notification of here's a summary page and what it looks like. From a business case perspective of also like why we loved the idea of Accord, like you can't have reps, especially right now, being like out of band of each other and doing different things. Like we need them all to be really efficient. And then having like a mutual action plan with like, here are the best next steps with our sales motion. So people are actually like effectively doing that all the same versus the wild, wild west is really, really effective. So I got like SDRs turned to AEs and it's like, here's best next steps. Just follow this, just follow this. This is what the best AEs on the team do.
Yeah. And for us, so we can't forecast a deal current quarter that's committed unless it has an Accord attached to it. It's not a real
nice.
Deal.
Nice.
So we've set that foundation internally that like if you have a deal closing December 27th and there's not a detailed moving Accord attached to it, then we don't think it's going to close in December. It needs to be pushed out to Q1. And also what that does is that protects me as well. And I show my leadership that I know how to run a deal and I know all the steps that are involved. If my boss ever asks me, hey, what's the game plan to get this done? Well, here it is. Here's the Accord. And it makes me look good internally and improves my internal brand. So, we talk a lot about the external buying experience, but it's also helping me kind of selfishly. It's showing me and my leadership that I know how to get a deal across the finish line.
That's a light bulb moment right there. Like the internal brand, like, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, I tell a lot of people like your internal brand is almost as important as your external brand, because it keeps you going when times are tough sometimes.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, I mean, we could talk about this, I'm sure, for another 45 minutes, but we're at the top of our session. People are jumping off already, so I know we got calls to get to, but firstly, huge thank you to Sean and Eric for spending some time to prep for this and share their learnings and from their journey here in terms of using maps with their customers, and really appreciate Brad and everyone else who jumped in for questions to make this an engaging session. We're trying to do more things like this where we're just getting great sellers who've gone through, losing a bunch of deals to learn these lessons to share with everyone and just kind of get better every day. I always learn a few things to integrate into my sales process and our team. So appreciate everyone taking the time, hopefully helpful. And if you want to join for session 2 or 3 and share this internally on Slack or whatever with your company, for folks to get better, definitely invite you to do that. So we'll send out the recording probably today. And yeah, feel free to ping myself or anyone, any questions you have. So appreciate everyone taking the time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Accordions.